Well, you've probably heard it said, if you've been in the church for any period of time, faith can move mountains. And so we have sometimes this idea that our faith exists so that we can go to the mountain and say, be moved into the sea. I've never been able to move a mountain into the sea. I don't think that's what God was talking about. I don't think God was talking about moving mountains. I don't think God was talking about doing things that in a really supernatural way, even though he can do that. I think what happens sometimes is we get fixated on that. We get fixated on the supernatural. We get fixated on the things that we want to do with our faith, and we forget that faith is really much deeper than that. What he was really talking about when he said that the faith to move mountains, what he was really talking about was your faith to get through this life with joy. I really believe that. I really believe that when God was talking about faith, he was talking about something deeper. He was talking about this ability that we have not to do supernatural things generally. Even though I think that's part of it. I think God does some wonderful things through us. What he was saying is you got to have faith in me, that I know what I'm doing, that I can use you, that you can move forward with his life, and that you can come into eternal life with me, that you don't have to be tossed back and forth by the teachings of this world. You don't have to have this mindset that you just got to survive this life. He has more for us in that. And I think when it comes to faith, that's what we need to grab onto. No matter what's going on in our life, no matter how difficult things are, we need to remember that we are more than conquerors with whatever it is that we're facing. But for so many of us, what we tend to do is we tend to just kind of allow things, little things, to get us off course. We allow little things to kill our faith. And over the next few weeks, that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about those little things that if we allow to have a foothold in our life, can literally kill your faith. Because what we do is when we focus on those little things, when we focus on those things that are not of God, then we start to question God. Then we start to question his power. Then we start to question his goodness. Then we start to question all of this stuff when the truth of the matter is God's in control of your life no matter what's going on in your life. It doesn't matter if your life's good. It doesn't matter if your life's bad. God is in control. He's there with you. But what he needs from you is to keep your faith strong. He needs you and I to be obedient. What he needs from us is to have a deeper walk with God than just showing up on church and singing a few songs and going home. Faith is so much deeper than what we make it out to be sometimes, because we allow certain things to keep us from living the life that God has for us. And one of those things is complacency. This idea that we can go through life and do everything the same way, every day, every way, and everything's going to turn out okay. See, the problem is that when we think like that, then when something bad does happen, or when something out of the ordinary does happen, it really shakes our view of God and our view of life. If you've lived in Oklahoma very long, or like me in Kansas, you've come to one thing in the spring that is something that you kind of get used to. In the spring, there's the potential for tornadoes. And so every spring you'll have a tornado warning. You'll hear sirens, and the same thing is in Kansas. And what happens though is when we hear those tornado sirens and when we get those alerts on our phones, sometimes we've gotten so many warnings or we've heard so many alerts that instead of going and seeking after a shelter, what do? That's right. We run outside. We go to the window to take a look, and because let's face it, who doesn't want to see a tornado? You know, part of it is we've gotten so many of those warnings. We've gotten so many of those things that we don't even know if they really exist. We see it on the Weather Channel, but they could be lying to us for all we know. Because we've had these things. Unless you've been in a tornado, we don't even know. So we just kind of like to see it, and it's almost like we're not going to believe it until we see it, kind of a thing. And so we don't seek shelter. We just kind of go through life and the motions, and most of the time, it doesn't hurt us. Kind of a case in point, when Caleb and I were eating lunch a couple of months ago, when that big storm that came into Broken Arrow and Tulsa, and that started off as a tornado warning. And so he and I were sitting there, we're eating lunch, and we're kind of towards the end of our lunchtime, and so we hear the sirens, and all of a sudden we start hearing those alerts, because the phone, man, those are annoying alerts, aren't they? When they go off and you sign up for them, and it's funny because we sign up for them, right? We have to sign up for those alerts. And so I'm signing up for those alerts, and the alert's coming on, and then I'm looking down, it's giving the follow-up of, hey, there's this tornado that's been detected, and where we were eating. I really didn't know at the time my directions very well, but the storm was kind of coming the direction that we were eating, and I didn't know enough to know that, and so I was looking at that, and then I looked up thinking that I would see a bunch of people at the window, or thinking that people would be leaving the store, or thinking that there would be a manager that would come and say, hey, we're going to stop everything right now, get everybody back in the cooler because there's this tornado warning that's out there. But when I looked up, waiters and waitresses were still taking orders. People were paying for their meal. People were still eating. There was only maybe one or two people that went to the window to see what was going on. And I'm watching all this stuff happen, and Caleb and I were eating, and I'm thinking, man, what is with these people? And that's when I realized I wasn't doing anything different. I was eating, I was finishing my food. We paid for it, by golly. Tornado or no. We're going to eat that meal, and so we're eating, and then we take it a step further. We check out, and we get into the storm in our vehicle and head back home, and it's looking really bad, and the sirens are going off, and I'm thinking to myself, this is stupid. This is crazy, and even though we become so complacent again because we hear so many of these different warnings, and we don't understand that even though the majority of time it may be nothing, there's always the potential for that one time. Being close to Joplin, Missouri, when that tornado went through and killed all those people, the number one reason, the number one factor for the massive death toll was? People didn't take shelter. They knew the storm was coming. They had plenty of warning, but they just didn't believe it could happen. Because they'd had so many different warnings and so many things before then that the complacency in Joplin, Missouri cost those people their lives. You see, sometimes we think of complacency and putting things off as the same thing, but they're really not. See, a complacency is just a disregard that something bad can happen. And we can become complacent in our spiritual walk as well. Sometimes in our spiritual walk, we can think that everything's just gonna be fine all the time. And we ask Jesus into our heart, and we come to church, and we have this formula about what it is to follow Jesus and what it is to be a Christian, and we just kind of go through life, and we get used to things, and we like those things, and because we like those things, if anything upsets our apple cart when it comes to worshiping God or when it comes to faith, we really get bent out of shape. We get bent out of shape not because those different things are happening, but because we have a very difficult time adjusting to different. And so instead of adjusting to different, what we do when we're complacent is we hold on tight to what it is that we're holding on to. Whether those are traditions, whether those are attitudes, whether those are just the way that we do things. And so we hold on tight to those things, and we fight other things. We have this idea that Christianity is reduced to this magic formula, and as long as I do this formula, because this is what worked for me back when I was a kid, this is what worked for me back when I first became a Christian, and we believe somehow that if we'll just keep doing those things, that nothing bad or nothing different is required. And the problem with that is that when we think that way, then complacency has the ability to wreak havoc on our lives. It wreaks havoc on our lives physically. It wreaks havoc on our lives spiritually, because complacency, by its very nature, tells us that we don't have to adjust to life's changes. We can just do things and be happy and focus on ourselves and forget the rest of the world, and everything's going to be okay. The only problem with that thinking is it's not true. Whether we like it or not, we can't allow complacency to dictate our spiritual walk. Your spiritual walk today is different than your spiritual walk was when you first became a Christian. Your spiritual experiences are different. We're going to get into that a little bit later in the message. And the problem with us is we don't always want to embrace this idea that I'm going to have to change. We want to hold on to things. And in the scripture that we're going to look at today, which is in the Old Testament, and it's the book of Amos. Amos is warning Samaria of this complacency, and what the results of complacency is. Just to kind of give you a little bit of history on who Amos is. Amos is one of what we call the minor prophets. He's a minor prophet. It's not because his prophets were minor, it's just he didn't have as many prophecies as maybe some of the other prophets that were out there. And so when we look at that, he really he had about 8 judgments that he placed on surrounding countries of Israel. He had about 3 messages against Israel, and he had another 5 visions of judgment on top of that. So he really didn't have a ton of prophecies, but his prophecies still carried weight. He was a shepherd. He didn't have a bunch of schooling. He was really content to kind of be out there taking care of his sheep. He was probably the first prophet to write his prophecies out, and so he was what some would call Amos is the reluctant prophet. And so Amos is warning Samaria, which when we talk about Samaria in the New Testament, Samaria in the New Testament is a place where Jews would go around. At this particular time in the Old Testament, this was before all of the intermarrying took place and all those kinds of things. There are lots of Israelites living in Samaria. Samaria was a great place to be. And so Amos, in chapter 6 of his book, starting at verse 1, begins to talk a little bit to Samaria about what they need to change in their walk and in their life. And he says this. He says, "Woe to you who are complacent in Zion, and to you who feel secure on Mount Samaria. You notable men of the foremost nation to whom the people of Israel come. Go to Kalina and go look at it. Go there to great Hamath. Go down to Gath and Philistia. Are they better off than you 2 kingdoms? Is their land larger than your kingdoms?" Before we go any further, those kingdoms were not larger than Samaria. Samaria was the place, but they were having some good times as well. Really important to understand. Well, he's basically saying, go to all these other smaller places and see is there any difference? No. Things were going well. Verse 3 says, "You put off the evil day, and you bring near reign of terror. You lie on beds inlaid with ivory, and you lounge on your couches. You dine on choice lambs and fattened calves. You strum away on your harps like David, and improvise on musical instruments. You drink wine by the bowlful, and you use the finest lotions, but you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph. You do not care about anybody but yourself. Your heart does not beat for what God's heart beats for. You have got it all. You have a life of luxury. You have everything that the rest of the world wants. You're focused on yourself. But then verse 7. Therefore, you will be among the first to go into exile. That's the prophecy. You've got it all. You don't have any reason to worry about where your next meal is coming from. You're playing music. You're eating the best food. You're drinking the best wine. You've got plenty of it. You're going along as if this is always going to be there. You're taking for granted all of this stuff. But guess what, guys? Because you don't care about anybody else, because you are taking in all of this stuff, you will be among the first to go into exile. In other words, enjoy it. In other words, be self-centered. It's okay. But just know there's a price to be paid. Then he finishes off with, your feasting and your lounging will end. Stop taking it for granted. Stop taking it for granted. See, Amos is trying to warn Samaria that they're not invincible. He's trying to say, guys, you've got all this stuff, and this is all because of the blessings of God, and yet you think that he's just going to give this to you because you deserve it. You think you're just going to have this stuff because you're God's favorite, and you're just going to kind of you're just going to kind of exist, and you're not thinking about anything that could possibly happen. And the fact is that those of you who feel the safest, those of you who feel the most secure, you guys are the ones that are in the largest amount of peril. Your prosperity, your self-sufficiency, all of that stuff is leading you to a place of complacency where you've forgotten that I have placed you on this earth for a reason. You're supposed to do more with what I've given you. You're supposed to do more with what I've blessed you with. Yes, enjoy it. God wants me and wants Samaria to enjoy all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, if our hearts don't beat for what God's heart beats for, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, then at the end of the day, I can expect it all to be taken away. And I can be expected that I could go down a place that I don't want to go. And so Amos is begging them not to give in to the status quo. I think it's real important. He didn't say that it was bad to strum the music. He didn't say that it was bad to drink the bowlfuls. He didn't say that it was bad to do any of those things. He's just saying that those are the only things that you care about. And you don't care about your brothers, the family of Joseph. Then you're missing the point. You see, Christians in the 21st century, we have to fight against complacency. Especially in this country, there's this thought that if we have a certain formula, that this certain set of things that we do, that if we do these things and we do these things right all the time, and what I did when I first got saved, if I'll just do those things and I'll hold on to that and I'll do things the same way, and then everything's going to be okay. Because, see, when I did those things, when I knelt at an altar of prayer and I asked God to come into my heart, and I started going to church, and I started going to small group, and I started doing some ministry here and there. If I checked off the boxes and I kind of did those things, and then I have these songs that I hear that as I listen to them, there are all these new songs, and they're great, and they really speak to me. And so the problem with new songs is new songs become old songs. And it doesn't matter where you are on the continuum. I think a lot of times we look at some of the older hymns, and when we talk to people that have a hard time letting go of those things, we say, oh man, they just need to get with it. And on one hand, yes, you're right. On the other hand, you're getting there. Your kids and your grandkids will not like the music you like in 20 years. Church services, for those of us that are younger, are going to look very different as we get older. And here's the thing about that. It's okay. It's a natural progression of things. And so it doesn't matter where you are on the whole continuum of things, But what happens is we get complacent. We like what we like. Whether it's a song, whether it's a favorite meal. I could have homemade burritos 3 times a week. I could eat it, and I could eat it, and I could eat 3 or 4 of them at a time. And I have that choice. But there's a cost for that, isn't there? I can get complacent, and I can think, oh man, as long as I ride, a few more miles on my bicycle, or as long as I do this, then everything's going to be okay. But the problem with that is eventually that's going to catch up. And that's me getting complacent. You see, the problem isn't the things that we do and the things that we hold on to. You see, traditions are important. They give us a wonderful starting place. And those are things that we need to look towards. But we can't make traditions an idol. And so those of us who are younger, we need to remember that as our kids get older, so that we can continue to reach a lost and dying generation. Church was never created for us to be comfortable. It wasn't created for us to escape from the rest of the world. Heaven is not an escape from the messiness of earth. Our faith in Jesus gives us the power to be overcomers, no matter what it is that we're dealing with. Whether it's good, whether it's bad. See, our eternity doesn't start after we die. Our eternity starts the moment we accept Jesus Christ as our Savior. We have this idea that heaven is the goal. It's not. Heaven's where we'll end up, but that's not the goal. The goal is Jesus. The goal is faith. The goal is having Jesus do a work in our life, having Jesus come in such a way that helps us not just to survive or barely get by, but to overcome whatever it is that we're facing. See, the Christian was never called to be complacent. We were called to be obedient. Because no matter how hard we try or what we think, times change, even though God does not. The way we experience God today is different than the way we experienced God when we were saved. The way my son experiences God is different than the way that I experience God. The way that my grandparents experience God is different than the way that you experience God. And it's okay. There's this idea sometimes that we have to hold on to our way of worshiping. There's this idea that we have to hold on to this way of following God. And if we'll just hold on to that, no matter how much it's not working, no matter how much it's not reaching anybody, if we'll just hold on to that, then everybody else will come around. And they'll understand that I'm right and I'm okay. And as long as I'm right and as long as I'm okay, and people will come and fill themselves with doing things the right way. And if they'll just grab a hold of the way things used to be, and if we'll just keep reaching back to yesterday, then that's the answer. The only problem with that is it's not true. Scripture's full of God saying, I want to do a new thing. I want to do a new thing with every generation. I want to do a new thing with every life. I want to do a new thing with every moment. I want to do a new thing. I don't want you to rest on what you had. It's not that there was anything wrong with what you did. It isn't that was all bad. And that's kind of what we think sometimes, is if there's any kind of change, especially in the church, if there's any kind of change, it's almost as if somebody's saying, we're going to change this because what you did before was so terrible. That's not what's happening in the church. Nobody's saying that the way that we did it yesterday was wrong. But we have that mindset. When we get to a place where our kids, where my son, man, I think about that and I'm still having nightmares about when my son takes over the church. Right? Then guess what? It's going to be okay. Because God's doing a new thing. My son's not still in the church. I want my son to have the church. I want my son's faith to grow. I want people to come to faith in a new way. Even if I don't get it, I was talking to Eric, one of the biggest reasons that I'm not a youth pastor isn't because kids are crazy and out of control. That's always been the case. I love that part, to be honest. It's fun. My problem is the things that I think are effective are probably not effective in 2016. I was a pretty effective youth pastor back in the 1990s. I could draw a crowd. There's some of the things that I'm positive that if I were to say, hey, Eric, I want you to do this, and he told the teens, hey, this is what we're going to do, teens would laugh at me and think that is the cheesiest thing I've ever heard of. And the thing is, I realized that. It doesn't mean that it was wrong. It was right at one time. It's not right today. See, what complacency does is it keeps us from adjusting to life's changes. And when we stop adjusting to life's changes, we stop being effective at taking the gospel to a world that desperately needs it. And I'm convinced that if the church would get off of what music we play, how we play it, what kind of building we meet in, whether we're a mega church or a small church, and we would start focusing on Jesus again, then everything would fall into place. That means that we cannot allow complacency to be the determining factor in our spiritual walk. Because complacency leads to doubt and protectiveness. Instead of having this idea of being obedient to God lead to joy and celebration and excitement. If you want excitement in the church, forget music and focus on Jesus. And I don't care if you're a traditionalist or a modernist. I don't care if you love the old hymns or if you like the newest cutting edge praise and worship stuff. Those are tools to help draw us closer to God. They are not the idols that we bow down to. We bow down to Jesus. And if we're going to be effective for him, then we've got to begin to start practicing some godly determination. Now, there's a difference between stubbornness and determination. Stubbornness is more about being what you won't do. And so if I'm stubborn, and you can ask my wife, there are things that I'm stubborn about, and some of you know this, I will not eat any banana product ever. Don't come to me and say, you've never tasted my banana pudding. I don't have to. I don't like bananas. You can't make me do it. I'm 47 years old. I will not be polite. I will not eat bananas. My mom would try to shove them in my mouth. She'd get it all over my face when I was a kid, thinking that I would like them. I don't like them. And I don't like you as much as I like my mom, so don't try to shove anything down my throat. And so, but that's something that I won't do. And when you think of stubbornness, what animal comes to mind? A mule. It's not about a mule. It's not about him. When he's stubborn, he's saying, I'm not moving. You ever seen anybody try to move a mule that didn't want to move? You can't do it. You and I are not strong enough. We're not big enough. We might hook it up to a truck or a car and try to pull it, and that's fine. You're just going to drag it. I've seen it happen. I grew up and I worked on a ranch, and we had a mule on the ranch, and I can remember it wasn't moving, and so my boss said, well, just tie him up to the tractor and he'll move then, and I tied him up to the traffic, and I drug that thing all the way back. He was not going to move. And so stubbornness is not a positive thing. And being determined is different in that it's about what you must do. So if I'm determined, that's not stubbornness. The stubbornness is saying, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to hold on to anything different. But when I'm determined, what I'm saying is I'm going to do whatever needs to be done to accomplish whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish. There's no greater story than this, than the story of my son. One of the greatest stories that I have is when we were living in Colorado. He was younger. I mean, he was really, really young during that time, and that's when inline skating was a big thing. It started to be a big thing. You could do a lot of there's a lot of inline hockey there. Even in Montrose, Colorado, they had a nice big rink there, and the skating parks where they could do the inline skating. And Caleb was at that age where he was wanting to do some of that stuff. And so the only problem with that is my son had this habit of liking something for about 10 minutes and then not wanting to do it after that. And inline skates are expensive, and especially the good ones. And so we went to a garage sale. We found some inline skates. They were probably not the best ones. They might have been the very first ones ever made. I don't know, but they weren't great, and they were a little bit big for him. And so we would have to put newspaper in it so that his feet would fit into it. And we just told him, said, listen, if you really like this and you learn how to skate, we'll go buy you some new inline skates. But we're not going to do it unless you really, really want to do it. And so the next day, I can remember he went and he put those skates on, and we had this little 10 by 6 foot concrete pad in the backyard, little porch area there, or slab there. And we had the really expensive Walmart plastic green table and chairs in the middle of all that. You guys remember those things with the little flimsy legs, and if it got too hot, they just kind of break off if you put any weight on it. And so he had that right there in the middle. And so as he put on his shoes and he got rid of all the chairs, I just kind of watched, and as he decided he was going to teach himself how to skate. And so he grabbed a hold of that little flimsy table, and he started around, just kind of scooting with the inline skates, just little scoot, little scoot, little scoot. And I'm watching him, and then all of a sudden, he disappears. Falls down, he jumps back up, grabs a hold of that wobbly table, and he goes around some more, and I'm watching, and he disappears. And I'm kind of looking at my watch. I'm thinking, okay, this isn't going to last very long. And so he gets up and he goes around the table again, and he gets a little farther each time. But sure enough, he's fallen, and he's fallen on the concrete, and he's skinning up his knees and his elbows, even though he had the elbow pads and the knee pads and the helmet on. And so I wasn't a bad parent. He had all the protection and stuff that he needed to have on. And I just watched him, and I'm thinking, okay, this is going to last 15, 20 minutes. 3 hours later, in the middle of summer in western Colorado, he's still going around the table. He's still falling. He's still getting up. And it moved from being funny to painful. Because you're watching him, and you're like, I want to help him. And everything within me, a couple of times, we would take a couple of spills, is I just want to go up and say, okay, I get it. You want to inline skate. I'm going to go buy you some skates. Just stop. There was even a part of me that wanted to go out and grab him by the hand and make sure he didn't fall anymore. But for whatever reason, something inside of me said, no, just make sure he has water. So I go out every once in a while with some water. Yeah, he'd sit, he'd drink. At the end of that 3-4 hour session, he was able to skate around the table without touching. He was able to get on the cart path there. We had a bike path and a walking path next to the house, and just skating. And then when he came back, and see his chest filled with air and a little smirk on his face. So I did it. That's determination. And if I'd have stepped in at any point in time, did any of the stuff that I was wanting to do, I would have robbed him of his moment. Sometimes we wonder why things are so hard. And why God sometimes doesn't come in and just fix everything. It's not that he's not there. And it's not that he's not giving you what you need to make sure that you're going to survive through it all. I don't think God wants to rob us of our moment. Complacency will rob you of your moment with God. Complacency can rob the church of God of its moment. You see, sometimes we forget that it just takes time sometimes. We get complacent. And we wonder why things aren't happening. And I said complacency leads to doubt. Well, God, I came to church. I still lost my job. God, I came to church. I even tithed a couple of times, and my spouse still left me. God, I came to church, and I sang the songs, and I embraced this new stuff, or I embraced this old stuff, and yet my significant loved one still died. And so complacency, this focus on ourselves and this focus on our comfort, leads to a place of doubt. And then sometimes that doubt just leads to a place of giving up completely and killing your faith. Oh, Scott, that's dramatic. I've been doing ministry now for a little over 20 years. And I've seen it happen time and time again. were people who were focused on themselves, and they were complacent, and they were never willing to embrace the changes that came with life. Not only left the church, but left the faith. None of you are immune. And the only way to overcome complacency is to embrace godly determination. And instead of leaving the church or leaving your faith when things get difficult or when you don't understand things, understand that God is not through with you. No matter where you are on the timeline, whether you're a new believer that's going through some difficulties right now, trying to hold on to some sort of comfort, God's not done with you. Whether you're somebody who's been in the faith for a long time and everything's changing, you just don't know, and so you're thinking, okay, it's time to find a church that's holding on to the old stuff. God's not done with you. See, God wants to continue to grow you. He wants to continue to develop you till the day that you die to accomplish His mission and not yours. I'll close with this. I joke around with people a lot of times when, pastors and other pastors, and I'll say, some people start talking about retirement, and I'm like, I'm a pastor, I'll never retire. I'll be preaching one day, from my wheelchair. And I'm just going to fall over dead right in front of everybody while I'm preaching. And just so you know, if that ever happens, I told James to do an altar call after that. And I joke about it, and it's obviously, in fun, and it's in jest. But here's the truth. If that's what God calls me to do, is to preach until my last breath, to never take that trip to Hawaii, to never take retirement and be able to spend all the Social Security that I put in over the years. You can laugh, it's okay. It's okay. Because even when I preach my last message in a church, God's not done with me. And just because you don't understand it, what's going on with your life, God's still not done with you. But let's focus on Him and stop being complacent. 1 Corinthians 9:24 says, do you not know that in the race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as you get the prize. You can't run the race or win the race by running in place. You only win when you move forward.